Welcome to Greater Good Radio Hawaii, where leaders inspire leaders. Greater Good Radio Hawaii is dedicated to social entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Evan Leong, and with me is my co-host, Carrie Leong.
Thank you, Evan. Today's guest is Jeff Watanabe, Managing Director of Watanabe Ing Komeiji LLC. Jeff is also the chairman of the Consuelo Zobel Alger Foundation, a position he has tenured since 1991. He is a community leader and on the board of more than a dozen for-profit and non-profit organizations. In 1971, Jeff and a group of lawyers established their firm, then the youngest law firm in the state, which went head-to-head with the more established agencies. As a law student, he worked in the office of Senator Daniel Inouye in the late 1960s. Please welcome to Greater Good Radio, Jeff Watanabe. Welcome to our show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
You're so involved with so many things. Could you give us a quick rundown of all the things that you do?
Well, I'm still the oldest person in my law firm, so I'm still there. But I spend a considerable amount of my time now really on the corporate side with businesses, and I still do a fair amount of nonprofit work.
But isn't it something like 10 or 11 nonprofit boards?
Yeah, fewer. I've tried to cut down the number of nonprofit boards that I'm sitting on, so the primary ones right now are the Sesame Workshop in New York, that I've been on the board for 20 years, and the Consuelo Foundation, which does work here as well as in the Philippines, and the Nature Conservancy. So those are the three of the ones that I spend probably most of my time on currently.
And then for your business ventures, though, you are the current chairman of HEI, along with being a partner in your law firm, along with being on a host of for-profit boards, right?
That's correct. I am the non-executive chair of Hawaiian Electric Industries, and I sit on the board of a couple of public companies, as well as several private companies.
Well, what does that mean, non-executive chair?
It means I'm not responsible for running the company. That's what it really means. But Hawaiian Electric is a unique company because it has basically it's really three companies: a bank, a utility, and a holding company. Each of those three companies, in turn, are regulated by different agencies. There are three boards, so it's a complex governance structure for a company that size.
Could you tell us about your law background? How did you get involved with the law? How did you get
involved with the law?
Not everything I do is legal.
Tell us about your run-in with the law.
How did you get involved in law, and what made you interested in practicing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. There are no lawyers in my family. I went to Roosevelt High School and then ended up getting my undergraduate degree from Berkeley. You know, that was during the Southeast Asian Wars, and if you weren't in graduate school, you were in Vietnam. And so I'm sure that had something to do with my decision to go to law school, because that was a very difficult time. But it was also a time when students were really kind of at the forefront of the social movement. So it was a very exciting time for me. And I actually had thought about going to graduate school after law school. And a professor of mine suggested that I was doing things backward, that I shouldn't apply for a PhD in a PhD program at Berkeley if I was intending to go to law school after that. He said, you know, you never know what's going to happen, so go to law school first, and if you want to get a graduate degree later, then that's fine. And he turned out to be right, because I never went back to get a PhD.
And so how did you decide what type of law you wanted to focus in on?
Well, the area of my undergraduate degree was always public jurisprudence. It was really public policy kinds of issues. And then I worked in Washington while I was going to law school for our then junior senator, Senator Daniel Inouye. And so that was an interesting time also, the 60s in Washington. And so when I came back, I worked for the Attorney General's office. Bert Kobayashi Sr., who was then Attorney General, was good enough to give me a job, and worked there for about a year, maybe a year and a half, and then spent a stint in the Army. I was gone for another 9 or 10 months, and then came back and started with some other young, foolish people, a law firm that none of us knew anything about starting. Yeah.
When you were in Washington, how did that experience change your perspective of Hawaii and what you're going to do with your life?
Yeah. Well, it had a profound impact, I think, on my early career. One thing that happens in Washington, especially in the Senate is sort of at the pinnacle of politics, I think, in the country. It's made up of very senior people who have spent many, many years of their lives in public policy in most cases. And you're really at the pinnacle of politics. And I think one of the things you learn is that you've got to love it to make it work. The other thing that Washington does, I think, to young people is it also makes them recognize, I think, how important it is to go home. Washington is a culture unto itself, and so a lot of people get caught up in that culture and never leave. But in my case, I had a boss who was pretty insistent that I come back. He was right. He was right.
Can you tell us the story behind that?
Yeah, one day we were waiting for a vote, which is often the case. And in Washington, if you work for a senator or a congressman, if he's in the office or she's in the office, you're in the office. It doesn't matter what time of day or whether it's a weekend or a holiday. So we were waiting for a vote, and the senator came up to me and asked me. I was a clerk in the office. He asked me what I was going to do when I finished law school. And I said, well, gee, I had gotten an offer to stay on committee and was considering doing that. And he said, no, don't do that. You go back home. And I said, well, why? Washington's an exciting place. It was an exciting time. And he said, don't think that you were able to get an education simply on your own. That a lot of people had to give up something so that you could do what you're doing now. Whether it's parents or grandparents, aunties and uncles, communities. And you have an obligation to go back, at least try going back and try to repay that. And his advice made sense to me, so I came home. And I've never been sorry.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for more on Greater Good Radio.